The sound was not loud. That is the first thing I want to say about it. It was not a crash or a scrape or anything a man would call alarming if he heard it in a barn or a kitchen. It was small, the kind of sound a boot heel makes when it shifts weight on a wooden floor. A single slow creak followed by stillness. The kind of sound that means something is adjusting its position because it heard you first. I noticed I had stopped breathing. The door was 4 feet in front of me. Split pine planks, dark with age, and moisture from the falls. Iron hinges gone the color of dried blood. A wooden bar latch on the inside, resting in the unlatched position. I could see the gap between the latch and the catch, a half-inch of shadow that told me the door would open inward if I pushed it. I did not push it. I stood on the 18 inches of stone ledge between the cliff face and the curtain of falling water, and I listened, and nothing moved again, and the waterfall was very loud behind my back, and I was aware all at once of how narrow the ledge was, and how far the drop was, and that my brother was directly behind me with no room to turn around. 6 weeks. That is how long we had been in these mountains before we found that door. 6 weeks since we buried our father in the caliche ground outside Durango, and walked away from the last thing we owned. A mule that drowned 3 days later crossing the Animas River in a September flood, taking with it our father's saddlebag and $4.11 in coin, and a photograph of our mother we had been carrying since she died. After the mule, we had the clothes on our backs, 2 wool blankets, a hand axe, a tin cup each, and a Sharps carbine with 11 rounds. That was the complete inventory of our lives. We had walked south, and then east, and then generally upward, into the San Juan Range, following a high trail we had been told by a trapper at Hartwick Station would keep us out of the worst of the autumn wind. October had come cold and dry, and then wet and colder. We had 34 cents between us. We had not spoken to another person in 11 days. I want to be honest about why we were standing on that ledge at all. It was not courage. It was not curiosity, though my brother would say otherwise about himself. It was that we had been stripped down to the point where the mathematics of risk had changed entirely. A man with nothing left to lose will walk a wet stone ledge behind a waterfall at 9,400 feet in October because the alternative is another night in the open, and we had already survived 19 of those, and the 20th was coming fast. Then the creek came again. Slower this time. Our father died on the 23rd of August, a Tuesday, in a rooming house on the south end of Durango. The landlady found him at mid-morning when he did not come down for the common meal. He had been complaining of stomach pain for 4 days prior and had not complained once in the 9 days before that, which was simply his nature, to hold a thing until he could not. The doctor who came said it was a rupture, something internal, that had given out without warning. He said it would have been fast at the end. He said this the way men say such things, quickly, without looking up from his bag. We buried him in the Durango cemetery, in a plot that cost us $1.15, which was most of what we had. There was no stone. We marked it with a cross cut from a fence rail, and I burned his name into the wood with a heated nail. Thomas Berg, 1839 to 1874. It took me most of an afternoon to get the letters straight enough that I was satisfied. The mule, a gray-sided animal our father had called General, without irony, lasted another 11 days after that. We had been moving south out of Durango, following the Animas River, when the animal stepped badly on a river crossing and went down in the current. We lost the bedroll and most of our flour. We got the mule out, but she could not put weight on the left foreleg, and by the following morning it was clear she would not recover. My brother wanted to try to sell her in the next settlement. I did not think she would make it that far, and I was right. We left her on the south bank of the river and kept walking. By late September we had worked our way into the foothills of the San Juans, and our money was down to 34 cents. We found Hartwick Station at noon on the 27th of September, a Thursday, gray and cold, with low clouds sitting on the ridgeline above the settlement. It was a trading post and assay office both, run by a man named Hartwick, who was in his mid-50s, thick-shouldered, and who spoke to customers with the specific brevity of a man who has heard every story and does not wish to hear any more. We asked if there was work. He looked us over, the two of us, lean and wet and carrying everything we owned, and said he had firewood that needed splitting and a drainage channel on the north side of the building that needed clearing. 10 cents a day, each. We took it. For the next 3 weeks, we slept in a lean-to. We built against a boulder 2 miles south of the station, ate what we could hunt, and returned each morning before first light to work for Hartwick. The nights were getting longer. Cass found it on a Saturday, the 4th of October. He had gone out before I was awake, which was not unusual. He had a habit of ranging early, moving quiet through the timber, while the light was still gray, and the animals had not yet pulled back from the clearings. I woke to the lean-to empty and the fire down to coal, and I rebuilt it with my back to the wind and waited, the way I had learned to wait, without worry yet, but with attention. He came back mid-morning. No game, but he was moving differently, the way he moved when something had caught in him, and he was working out how to say it. He told me about the waterfall first. He had followed a small drainage south from camp, 2 miles or a little more, climbing through pine and loose shale, until the slope steepened and the drainage narrowed into a ravine. The sound of the water reached him before he saw it, a hard, constant sound against stone, louder than a creek that size ought to be. When he came around a rock face, he found the falls, perhaps 30 feet of water coming off a granite shelf, dropping into a shallow pool, the whole face of the cliff behind it sheeted in mist and dark green moss. The elevation there was high enough that frost still clung to the north-facing stone in the shadow. He said he stood there for a while, just looking. Then he told me about the ledge. Along the left side of the falls, where the cliff face angled slightly inward, there was a shelf of rock, perhaps 18 inches wide, running behind the curtain of water. He could see it clearly from where he stood. A natural thing, just a fold in the stone, but it went somewhere. The water fell outward from the lip above, and left enough clearance that a person could, if they were careful and did not mind being wet, walk that ledge all the way to the back of the falls. He had not done it. He had stood on the near edge of the shelf and leaned in as far as he dared, and in the dimness behind the water he had seen what he came back to tell me. A dark gap in the cliff face, an opening, and set flush into the wet stone at the left edge of that opening, dark with rust, old, unmistakably worked iron, a hinge. He woke me the next morning before light. We reached the falls just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, which meant the shadows were still full in the ravine, and the mist off the water sat cold against our faces. I stood where he had stood and looked at the ledge, and I looked at the gap behind the water, and my first thought was practical. The overhang would break the wind. Shelter. That was what I was thinking. Cass was not thinking about shelter. The ledge was 18 inches wide. I measured it later with my hand span, 9 spans of 8 fingers each, which put it close enough. The stone was dark with spray and had no grit to it, nothing to catch a boot on, and it ran maybe 30 feet from the near bank to the back of the falls. The water came down not 3 feet off the outer edge. Standing there on the bank, looking at it, I could feel the cold coming off the curtain in waves. He went first. He was lighter, and he wanted it more, and I had learned not to argue with that particular combination. I watched him work his way along, one shoulder pressed to the cliff, his left hand trailing the stone. He moved slowly. He did not look down. The mist made his coat go dark across the shoulders almost immediately. I followed with the sharps held crosswise against my chest, barrel out, because there was no other way to carry it on that shelf, without the stock catching the rock behind me. The weight of it pulled at my arms. My left boot found a shallow depression in the stone, and I paused there, redistributed, pressed my shoulder harder into the cliff. The sound of the water was enormous. It wasn't loud the way a storm is loud. It was complete, the way silence is complete, filling every frequency so that my own breathing disappeared inside it. He had stopped ahead of me. I came up beside him. The cliff face at the back of the falls opened into a natural fissure, wider at the top, narrowing toward the ground, maybe 6 feet tall and 4 across. Set into the left side of that fissure, iron-hinged, planked from split pine that had gone the color of old charcoal, a door, 4 feet tall at most, low enough that a man would have to duck to pass through. The wood had shrunk with freeze and thaw until light showed between the planks in thin, pale seams. We stood there. Neither of us moved toward it. That was when I heard it. A knock, slow, irregular, like something striking stone with no particular intention. Not a signal, not a pattern, just the sound of an object settling or shifting. Once. A pause of perhaps 4 seconds, once again. From inside the door. I had the sharps up before I had decided to raise it. I do not remember the decision. My thumb found the hammer, and I held it there, not cocking it, just holding. The metal cold through the pad of my thumb. The mist moved against the back of my neck. Beside me, I felt him go absolutely still. Not the stillness of someone preparing to run, but the stillness of someone listening so hard they have stopped being a body and become only an ear. 15 seconds, maybe less. The knock did not come again. The knock did not come again, and after a long moment I lowered the sharps by degrees, though I did not uncock it yet. The mist continued its slow work against the stone. The door stood there in the cliff face, the way a door has no business standing, patient, dimensionless, waiting. I stepped forward. The ledge was 18 inches of wet rock, and I moved along it with my back pressed to the cliff, the rifle held across my chest, until I was close enough to see the latch. It was a simple wooden bar, the kind any man could cut in an afternoon, a length of pine, maybe 8 inches, seated in 2 iron brackets. It was not seated. The bar hung in only one bracket, loose, angled down, the way a bar falls when the person who set it last is no longer there to set it right. It had not been latched from inside. It had simply been left. I lifted the bar free with 2 fingers. The iron bracket gave a low, dry scrape. The door opened on its own weight. It did not swing fast. It moved the way a door moves when the hinges are old, and the wood has found its balance over years. A slow, steady arc inward, until it came to rest against the interior wall, with a sound like a quiet exhale. The darkness inside was not complete. There was a fissure somewhere above, narrow, because a pale shaft of gray light fell at an angle across the floor, and showed me stone, then earth, then the edge of something flat and dark. The air that came out was cold, colder than the outside air. And it carried a smell I had no immediate name for. Old ash, yes. The gray mineral smell of a fire that has been cold for a very long time. But underneath that, something else. Dense and animal. Close. The smell of something that had lived in a small space for a long while. I went in first, ducking the lintel, and stood just inside the mouth while my eyes adjusted. 20 feet deep, I would estimate later. 9 feet wide at the entrance. The ceiling sloped, and at the back, the space narrowed, until a grown man could not have stood upright. The shaft of light from above cut across the middle third, and showed me what the dark had been hiding, item by item, the way a man's eyes learn a room. A sleeping pallet on the ground, elk hide, or what had been, collapsed now, rotted flat, the hair gone gray, and sparse as an old man's. A stone hearth built against the left wall, small and careful, river rock fitted without mortar. 3 candle stubs in a line on a natural shelf in the rock, wax melted down to their last half-inch. A rusted camp stove in the corner, its pipe gone. and on the ground beside the pallet, a tin box and a leather satchel, side by side, as though someone had set them there before lying down. We stayed the night outside the door. I could not have said precisely why. The cave was dry, and the wind off the ridge was cold enough to ache in the joints, and dry shelter was the thing we needed most. But I could not make myself go in and lie down in that dark, not with the tin box and the leather satchel sitting there like objects still in use, set down by hands that might return for them. My brother did not argue. We built a small fire from deadfall in the hollow below the ledge, wrapped ourselves in our blankets, and slept in shifts the way we had since the Animus crossing. The second morning was October 7th. I know because my brother had taken to writing the date in his journal each dawn, a habit he had formed after our father's death in August, as though keeping an exact count of the days was a way of holding on to something. He was gone when I woke. I found him an hour later, up above the falls, his boots dark with mud to the ankle, crouched over a shelf of soft earth on the slope above the fissure. He didn't look up when I reached him. He just pointed. There were tracks in the mud, cloven, deeply impressed, the spread of a mule deer's front hooves, a big animal, from the depth of the prints. The shelf was narrow, no more than a yard across, and the deer had walked it with the easy confidence of something that knew the ground. I looked down from where we stood. The stone beneath our feet was thin here, almost hollow-sounding when I pressed my boot against it. I could hear, very faintly, the falls below. The cave's ceiling was the underside of the rock we were standing on. We stood there a while without speaking. I tried to remember exactly what the sound had been. The two beats, deliberate and heavy, coming from inside or above, or both at once. A deer's weight on thin stone above a cavity. Sound traveling down through rock. I had been ready to believe in something I could not name. What I had heard was an animal crossing a ridge above us in the early morning, its hooves striking ground that happened to be hollow. My brother looked at me. He was not laughing, though there was something in his face that was adjacent to it. He said only, "Deer." I said I knew. But the resolution of that small mystery did not lighten what I felt standing at the entrance to the cave again. If anything, it pressed in the other direction. The tracks in the mud were fresh. Whatever prints had been made by the builder of that door, the hanger of those iron hinges, the man who had split and fitted those pine planks and brought them up a stone ledge 12 miles from any settlement, those tracks were 20 months gone at least, or older. The deer moved through. Whatever had lived here did not. The satchel was behind the hearth. I found it on the afternoon of October 7th, when the light coming through the cave's entrance had shifted enough to reach the back wall. I had been working methodically, the way our father had taught us to search a camp, starting at the entrance and moving inward, touching each object before moving to the next, and I had almost convinced myself there was nothing left to find. The sleeping pallet, the candle stubs, the camp stove, its iron pitted with rust. Then I crouched low near the hearth and put my hand flat against the stone floor and felt the seam. A flat stone, roughly 18 inches across, seated so evenly that the edges were invisible until you ran your fingers over them. I worked it free with the hand axe's pole. Beneath it was a shallow depression, and inside the depression, folded in on itself, was a leather satchel, dark brown, or had been once. The leather had dried and cracked along the fold lines but held its shape. The strap buckle was brass, gone greenish. I set it on my knee and unfastened it without standing up. My brother watched from the entrance, his silhouette against the afternoon. The first thing my fingers found was the ledger. Cloth-covered boards, roughly 6 inches by 9, bound with a strip of rawhide that had been tied and retied many times. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small and precise, the script of a man trained to be economical with space. There were columns of figures, elevations in feet, compass bearings, distances in chains and links, soil notations, a surveyor's record, professional and exact, the kind of document a company would file and eventually lose in some Denver office. I turned pages. More of the same. Elevation readings, contour sketches, the names of ridges and drainages written in a hand so careful it looked almost printed. The man had surveyed this country thoroughly. He had known it. Then, somewhere past the halfway mark, the columns disappeared. There was no transition. One page ended mid-measurement, and the next began with a single line, written slightly larger than everything before it. The pen pressed a little harder into the paper. I have decided I will not go back. Below it, a date. November 3rd, 1861. The remaining pages were not a surveyor's record. The figures were gone. The bearings and chains were gone. What replaced them was something else. Longer entries, sometimes a single line, sometimes covering the full page front and back. The handwriting shifting over what I would later understand to be years, loosening in some places, tightening in others, changing the way a man's face changes when you do not see him for a long time, and then see him all at once. I turned the page. The light in the cave was thin and going thinner. I kept reading. The first entries after that line were short, a few sentences each, sometimes less. The handwriting was still controlled then, still the handwriting of a man who measured things for a living. November 8th. Snow came early. I am adequately supplied for the season. No one has followed the creek. November 19th. Found the fissure entirely by accident. A ledge behind the water. A door already half made by the cliff itself. I will improve it. December 2nd. The latch holds. The sound of the falls is constant. I have begun to think of it as a wall. I read those first ones quietly, to myself. The candle was low, and I had lit a second stub from the tin box, setting it on the cold stone beside the first. My brother was sitting across the hearth from me, with his arms around his knees and his chin resting on top of them, watching my face more than the page. Then the entries grew longer. I read those aloud. The man had worked for a company out of Denver, the Meridian Silver and Lead Company. He called it by its full name, the way a man names a thing he has reasons to name precisely. He had been their payroll agent in addition to his survey work. In the autumn of 1861, he had been carrying their seasonal payroll south, $4,340 in coin and company scrip. And somewhere between one decision and the next, he had simply not delivered it. He did not describe the theft as a theft exactly. He described it as a door that appeared in front of him and a life on the other side of it that seemed, in that particular moment, less terrible than the life he was already living. He did not explain what that other life had contained. He never did, in any of the entries I read that night. What he described instead was the fear. 3 winters of it. He wrote about sounds on the ledge above the waterfall that turned out to be nothing. Wind, water, the weight of snowpack shifting. He wrote about a man he had seen once, far below on the creek, who had paused and looked upward and then moved on, and how that single pause had cost the writer 3 nights of sleep. He wrote about waking in the dark and lying completely still, listening for footsteps that never came. Then the fear thinned, the entries slowed. The 4th winter he wrote less about being followed and more about the country itself, the quality of light in November, the behavior of a mule deer that had started appearing near the falls each morning, the way the cold moved differently at this elevation than anywhere else he had ever slept. My brother said nothing for a long while after I stopped reading. Then he said, he stopped running and just stayed. Outside, the waterfall kept its sound against the dark. My brother reached into the satchel again without asking. He drew out the canvas bundle and held it in both hands, feeling the weight of it before he unwrapped it. The canvas had been folded around the object many times, as though the man had wanted the protection to be more than practical, as though each fold had been deliberate. Inside was a tintype, studio taken, formal. A woman seated, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a dark dress with a high collar. Two children standing beside her, a girl on the left, a boy on the right, the boy perhaps 4 years old, the girl perhaps 6. They were not smiling. Nobody smiled in photographs then, but there was something in the woman's posture that suggested she had been composed for this, that she had thought about how she wanted to appear. She had decided on stillness. My brother held it toward the candle and looked at it for a long time. Then he passed it to me without a word. The confession was folded underneath where the tintype had lain, 3 sheets of foolscap covered on both sides in a compressed hand, smaller than the journal entries, more controlled, as though the writer had measured how much space he was permitted. It was addressed to no one, no salutation, no name. It began with a date, September 1862, which meant he had written it nearly a full year after he had come up into the mountains, and it did not read like a letter. It read like a man setting down the exact weight of something he had been carrying. He named the company. He named the amount, $4,340 in coin and company scrip, the autumn payroll for the Meridian Silver and Lead Company's field crews. He named the date he had taken it, and the route he had walked afterward. He named 4 men who had gone without pay because of what he had done, and whether those men were still living he did not know, but he named them anyway. He named his reasons. Then he crossed out the reasons and wrote beneath them, "These are not reasons. These are what I told myself." The last line on the last sheet was very small, as though he had run out of space, or courage, or both. I did not spend $1 of it. It is in the tin box. My brother and I looked at each other across the candlelight. The tin box was sitting where it had always been, on the flat stone beside the rusted stove. It was perhaps 10 inches long, 8 wide, sealed with a hasp that was not locked. I leaned forward and opened it. The box was empty. Not the emptiness of something ransacked or taken, no torn lining, no impression in the wood where coin had rested, no smell of old metal, just clean, dry pine, a few years of dust in the corners, and a single folded slip of paper, so small I almost missed it against the bottom seam. I unfolded it carefully. It was not foolscap. It was a torn strip of the same ledger paper he had used for his field notes, maybe 3 inches wide, the handwriting smaller and more deliberate than anything else we had read, the way a man writes when he knows it is the last thing he is going to write on a subject and wants to get it exactly right. It said, "The winter of 1869. I carried it down to the creek in 4 loads, coin by coin and scrip by scrip, and put it into the water below the falls. I could not spend it. I could not bring it back. I could not keep looking at it. The mountain has it now. I am sorry this is the answer." That was all. I sat with the paper in my hands for a long time without speaking. The candle had burned down another inch. My brother was watching me and not saying anything, which was the right thing to do. I thought about what $4,340 looked like. More money than our father had ever held in his life, more than we would see in the next 10 years put together, scattered piece by piece into a mountain creek by a man alone in the dark, fed to the water because he could not undo what he had done and could not live with what he had kept. I tried to imagine that walk. 4 loads, down the ledge in the cold, past the falls, crouching at the creek bank and opening his hands. 4 times. The money was somewhere down the Animus drainage by now, if it had not been ground to nothing against the creek stones in 5 years of runoff. It did not matter. It was gone the way things go when a mountain decides to keep them. I set the note down on the stone beside the stove. I looked at the tin box, the closed satchel, the folded sheets of confession still spread open on the pallet. He had not bought his way out of it. He had not bought anything. He had simply removed the thing that made the wrong irrevocable, or tried to, and then sat in this cave for 4 more years watching whether it worked. I did not think it had worked, but I was not sure I had the right to say so. My brother finally spoke. He asked what we were going to do with what we had found. I told him I didn't know yet. That was the truth. I lay down on the stone floor with my blanket pulled up and stared at the ceiling of the cave for a long time after my brother went to sleep. The candle was almost gone. I let it burn down to nothing rather than snuff it, because I wanted the light for as long as it would give it. What do you do with a dead man's accounting of himself? There was no law up here to bring it to. The Meridian Silver and Lead Company had been dissolved. I had heard that much from a teamster in Durango. Something about a consolidation, new ownership, new name. The men whose wages were taken in 1861 would be in their 40s now at the youngest, and most of them were probably not alive to be found. The confession was 13 years late, and its author was 20 months dead, and the coin itself was somewhere under the animus, worn smooth or buried in silt. But the names were there. He had written the names of 11 men on the second sheet, their full names, their positions, the amount each was owed. He had remembered all 11. That seemed to me like the one thing in the whole ledger that had cost him something to keep. I opened my brother's journal to a clean page near the back. I wrote slowly, and I wrote everything that mattered. The company name, the territory, the autumn of 1861, the amount, and then the 11 names copied out, one by one, in the same order he had written them. I did not editorialize. I did not write what I thought of the man. I just wrote what was true, and what could be verified, if anyone ever chose to verify it. In the morning, I told my brother I was going to Hartwick Station. He asked if he should come. I told him to stay and tend the fire and rest his feet, which had been blistering since the 3rd day on the trail. He knew I wanted to go alone. He didn't press it. It was 12 miles. I made it in a little under 4 hours, the journal tucked inside my coat against the damp. Orrin Hartwick was behind his counter weighing out flour for a man I didn't recognize. I waited. When the man left, I asked Hartwick if I could write something into his public ledger. He looked at me a moment, then set the book on the counter and opened it to the next blank page and handed me his pen without asking what it was. I copied the summary out clean. Meridian Silver and Lead. Autumn, 1861. The amount. The 11 names. Hartwick read it when I finished. He did not say anything for a while. Hartwick said, "That's a long time to carry something." I agreed that it was. He closed the ledger and set it back on its shelf without another word, which was the right thing to do. The walk back took longer. The light was going by the time I came down off the ridge and found my brother where I'd left him, sitting near the fire with his boots off, his journal open across his knee. He looked up. I shook my head to tell him there was nothing to report, and he nodded and went back to writing. We stayed one more night at the camp below the falls. In the morning, we went up together. The mist was heavy off the water, and the ledge was wet, but we crossed it without trouble. My brother went first this time. I followed with the tintype wrapped in its canvas, held flat against my chest with one hand. Inside the cave it was exactly as we had left it. The door open, the cold hearth, the pallet of rotted hide, the satchel still on the ground where I'd set it, the tin box, the 3 candle stubs. I took the tintype outside and climbed to the top of the falls. There was a natural shelf of rock up there, above the spray line, where the stone was dry and flat. I built a small cairn, 7 stones, the flattest I could find, and set the canvas-wrapped tintype into the center of it, face down, protected from the weather as well as anything could be protected in that country. I don't know what I thought I was doing. I don't think I needed to know. My brother was waiting at the cave door with the hand axe when I came back down. He didn't ask permission. He set the blade to the pine lintel above the door and worked carefully, the way he always worked when something mattered to him, and he carved our names and the year into the wood. ELI and cast, OCT, 1874. It took him about 20 minutes. The letters were small and even. We left the door unlatched. We didn't take anything. I want to say something to you before we go. Something plain, without decoration. Two people with almost nothing between them can still do an honest thing. That is not wisdom. That is just what we found to be true. We found a man who spent 13 years alone in the dark, behind moving water, trying to square himself with something he'd done, writing it all down for nobody. And the only thing we could give him was the same thing he'd tried to give those 11 men: a record, a true account. Evidence that someone came, read it, and left it alone. That is sometimes all you can do for the dead, and sometimes it is enough.